Welcome to Being Human in the Age of AI, the Coaching Lens. I'm your host, Deborah Grant. In our last episode, we began a fascinating conversation with Veronica Nieto and Stuart Ashman. Today, I'm continuing that discussion with Stuart Ashman, an engineer, technology leader, and coach who has spent decades helping professionals navigate change in the tech sector. We'll explore the human side of technological disruption, layoffs, uncertainty, leadership challenges, and the difficult decisions facing organizations as AI transforms the workplace. How can leaders think more strategically about the capabilities of their people? How can organizations balance efficiency with compassion? And how might we create workplaces that bring out the best in human potential, even as technology continues to advance? Join us as we reflect on this together. Here we go. Stu Ashman, it's great to talk to you some more. This is a bit of a continuation of our previous podcast, Being Human in the Age of AI, the Coaching Lens. And I wanted to talk to you further on your experience, which is really unique and yet being shared by many people everywhere, which is in your industry as an engineer in the computer field. And a lot of people are experiencing what you're going to be telling me more about, which is how AI is being managed in terms of the people management, the layoffs and so on that are going on, the shakeups that are going on. Tell me a little bit about your experience and how this has made you an expert of this entire event unfolding before us.
I'm not sure I would call myself an expert, but I've got some experience. I think there's a lot of people in the industry, in the tech industry in particular, that are, either seeing their companies lay people off or, feeling the anxiety of that being something that is looming in their future. There's been an amount of discussion about the reasons for layoff. A lot of companies are putting this forward as we need to invest in AI. We need to, it's kind of like an OPEX to CAPEX type shift, right? Like it's, we're losing salaried positions in order to invest in, costs of tooling, infrastructure, cloud compute, etc. And I don't know how true some of those reasons are. But, other reasons are that they're saying, we're replacing roles with AI, which I would also counter with, if someone is 100% replaceable by AI, why were they doing that job? Because if automation can replace you, then you weren't adding unique value as a human being. And that feels to me like a leadership problem. Like, why did you employ people in that role? And you could have, previously had maybe not as good as AI or as fast as AI, but you could have had machinery doing that. Why weren't you growing those people, teaching them new skills, et cetera, et cetera? So there are a number of, situations and reasons being given around the kind of what seems to be a more pervasive layoff culture than has ever been before.
A layoff culture.
Mm.
Tell me what that means to you exactly. I can imagine, but what do you see in that?
Well, I've been in two large organizations, well-known organizations, and I might as well name them, Cisco Systems and Motorola, and both have adopted a kind of quarterly layoff plan. So every quarter they potentially will lay people off. It's become like a normalized part of corporate work and corporate planning, budget planning. Feels very wrong to me that that's, the way we run businesses these days. Because at the end of the day, human beings are being impacted. And, back to the conversation about what the reasons are behind, a layoff, whether it's, AI investment or whether it's AI replacing your job, it doesn't really change how someone being impacted hears that they're being laid off.
Yeah.
Because most people, hear that as I'm not needed anymore, I'm not valued. And that's that's quite an impactful thing for someone to feel.
It is. It is. And you can't get around that. In fact, we are both studying coaching or have finished our training for coaching in the Erickson method. And we also both have other parts of what we do in our work as teaching or training or consulting businesses. And so this is something that we've both felt, and a lot of the people that I'm working with now are feeling, is this short-sightedness, basically, that if there were some other element brought in terms of human resource training, coaching, mentoring, et cetera, that, and also in the strategic planning of the organizational design of a corporation, that they could be moving a lot of these people into other positions, or there are many, many ways to handle a group of people and make them meaningful for the profit building goals of a company. We're not people to be fit in a little one cog of one organization. There's so many other ways to manage. And so I've seen that in Japan, as everybody knows. That's a big part of my background. So Japanese corporations have traditionally just kept moving people around. And in that, there's a retraining, but there's also this benefit of, say, someone who's suddenly in sales or marketing that was just an engineer before. They learn all about those skills, and they, of course, bring all the expertise that they have, the product knowledge, which gives them a much higher level of ability to solve customer problems, et cetera. So there's so many advantages to doing that. And why do you think that some of our other Western corporations seem so slow at getting the benefits of that?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I don't know if you want me to go into my background that kind of grounds some of that thinking too, but
yes, please.
Okay, I'll start sort of at the end and then work backwards to a certain extent. But I agree. Like, I think typically the larger an organization is, the more siloed the roles and responsibilities become. And I think that is a problem. That is a challenge. I actually started my career doing an apprenticeship, which was, back then, 1986, it was rare. I deliberately chose it because I wanted that sort of breadth of experience of learning. I think, I don't know if this is still true today, but I think one of the only places where that still exists, where you have to go through all the roles, is the hotel industry. I think in order to become a hotel manager, you still have to do every role in the hotel before you can become a hotel manager. And I think that's such an interesting idea. But to your point, most people in modern sort of particularly tech culture start out in a role and then probably stay in that role. They don't move. And often they don't cross-populate ideas. There are certain ways of running teams and certain team structures that actually bring different perspectives together to work on something. So some common ones in software industry might be, you have someone who represents the customer, typically a technical product manager, or a product manager, or a product owner type role. And you might have separate roles of software developer and software quality profession. And you might bring those together. And sometimes you might also have user experience or usability type person that also joins that, in order to figure out how to build, develop, design software that solves a problem for customers. But that's it. So you don't get to understand what it might be like to be a salesperson in that organization, or how marketing works, or how customer support works, or often you don't even get to work with folks that deal with translation or technical documentation, or any of the other roles that an organization typically needs in order to to be successful. So I do think there's a lot of value in that cross-population of ideas. But I also think there's a lot of value in leaders understanding that there are different roles and that, they're not needing to be experts or masters in those roles, but they should be aware of, the difference of experience, the difference of skill, the difference of capability that those can bring to bear. And then on the flip side of that is, how do you connect what you do as part of any of these businesses to meaning for the business, to, whether it's to the goals or mission of the business, or whether it's to the core kind of values or the reason the business exists or what problems it's trying to solve and who for. If you feel like you're just a cog, just a part of the machinery, then you're not going to really feel very connected to, the purpose, the overall mission of an industry or a business.
That's right. Yes, I feel pretty passionate about that idea of this rotational format in organizations because, well, there's a show called Undercover Boss. I don't know if they have that in Canada, but it's always interesting because, of course, the undercover person goes in and finds out all the wonderful things that the underlings are doing, the minions are doing, and that are never commended for those wonderful acts of heroism that they perform every single day. And suddenly they get rewarded at the end if they've done if they've revealed something important about the company, then these one or two people get rewarded for being heroes, that the unsung heroes that they've been for so long. Obviously, that's a TV show, but there's something in that for sure, that especially in the larger the corporation becomes, the more removed probably the top level becomes from what people are actually doing every day and what their challenges are and what the unfairness is, the injustices, or the hidden power structure that is really running the company that they know nothing about. So there are a lot of things that they're not in touch with. But so looking at all of that, what are the kinds of things that you experienced yourself in terms of what was unfair or unjust about layoffs and what was happening to the people that now you're mentoring or training a lot of these people now, correct? With your training course. Tell us a little bit about that and what you see this empty spot or what you can provide during this massive transition that the industry is going through.
I guess before I go there, I just want to kind of connect a few dots. So I'm quite a fan of kind of lean thinking, which was, at least as I understand it, mostly founded from the kind of Toyota company. And they have a phrase that I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, and you can check me on this, but Gemba, walk around, is my understanding, and it is exactly that idea that you just expressed. It's the idea that a leader in an organization, a manager, would walk around and actually see how work was being done or see the challenges that people were facing. So I'm a big fan of that aspect, because I do think there is a distinct gap between what the senior leaders in an organization think is going on and actually what is going on.
Yeah, Gemba means the place. The place itself is the direct translation of that. But I think also that there's talk of that, or I've heard people attempt that, but it's quite superficial, right? It might be someone inviting people for lunch, or someone at the top inviting people for lunch, or walking around shaking hands, saying, call me anytime, I'm here to listen to whatever you want to talk about, and it'll be confidential. And then, of course, you find out that's not true at all, and that people are not being heard, really, basically, in terms of their, not as complainers, but as people who have valuable insights into what's going on, or trying to really help the leadership to fill something in, or that they're missing something, or that they see a problem that, if it were solved, could benefit everyone. So there is a lot of altruism going on within the ranks that they do not get to be educated by or to learn from. So that's a problem for sure. And that again is not something I've been used to working with the Japanese. It's not top down, it's bottom up. And the the guys on the street, and I mean men and women and all the people, are coming in and reporting what's actually going on, and they're intently listened to. It's not just, oh yeah, that's interesting. Sorry that happened to you or whatever. It's, oh no, let's do something about that. Let me escalate that. We'll
Mm-hmm.
make sure it gets in the budget. We'll make sure that and so it goes up. And then, of course, the leadership takes all that information. There is a value structure attached to the decision making, and it is predicated on we want everyone to prosper. So that means the whole company together as a
Mm-hmm.
whole. And one of the reasons it's shifting even in Japan is because the lifelong employment system has little by little been eroded. And the lifelong employment system means just that. So people don't go, they don't leave, they're not pushed out unless something horrible happens, that
Mm-hmm.
illegal or something awful. If they are not good in one position, they'll find another one that suits them. So they're building loyalty throughout that whole time. Many Westerners could not tolerate that kind of a life, but there are elements that could be brought in, right? That I think to really not perfunctorily or just be popular, if you're really listening, if the leaders are listening, then and taking action, then there are many benefits to them. You talked
Absolutely.
about how, to me recently, about how once the layoffs occur, often now what's happening is the leaders in place, they remain, and a lot of the, I call them minions and underlings, but a lot of the staff goes.
Mm-hmm.
Then the whole pressure is left on that upper management person or higher middle management person in a role. What is that about?
Well, I guess in my experience, that pressure does come downwards, to the point you've just talked about, the bottom up culture. I think there's a lot of benefit to that type of culture, but more often what I'm seeing and experiencing is more of what I would call a command and control top down culture. And so, if we look at a situation where, a layoff has occurred, what I've typically seen, and it's unrealistic and will seem kind of almost silly to anyone listening to this, but it happens, is that the message coming down is the expectation is you still produce everything that you were meant to produce with, what was previously a larger team with the now reduced workforce. There's that
Yeah.
sort of almost, you're expected to produce magic kind of thing. So, but that pressure is pushed downwards. So, the first level managers typically are the ones bearing the brunt of that because they're being kind of pressured from above and below at this point. So their leader is telling them that they're expecting them to still deliver on all the things, and their team is saying, well, we can't because we used to be a team of 8, now we're a team of 5, or whatever. And that's a difficult place to be. But it also relates to that idea that those leaders that might be the ones making the decision about, letting a bunch of people go are often not really being held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
So, an analogy that I've kind of used to talk about this is if you think about a boat race where you have multiple rowers and you have someone steering the boat. The person steering the boat is the leader, and obviously the boat goes as fast as the rowers can row. And if the leader is just constantly shouting at those rowers and kind of berating them to row quicker, and they don't, kind of win the race or get to the destination in time, then they're being sort of, discarded or thrown overboard. But the leader that was pointing the boat in the right direction or the wrong direction doesn't have any accountability for them reaching the destination. And so it just feels like we've talked about the disconnect of the senior leaders not really knowing what's going on, but I think sometimes that disconnect is a little bit of a protection mechanism, so that they feel okay or comfortable making decisions to say, well, lay off 10% of the workforce, because they don't have any relationship, they don't have any connection, and they are seeing those people as being disposable rowers in this analogy, and that if we need more, we'll just hire more later, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's been a lot of heartbreak for a lot of people, honestly. And you don't really see a lot about that in the news. You don't see a lot of stories about the people who now are trying to make a life with no real options. I mean, what are the options? So I want to ask you about that. What's the gap there? And I've been writing a little bit about apprenticeship, what you talked about, and the benefits of that. You're such a benefactor of that apprenticeship system. You told me about how you spent the early part of your career just really doing that apprentice work, and that gave you a huge advantage later in your career as well.
Mm-hmm.
But also the entrepreneurial topic to me is very interesting, because that's sort of what I've been feeling, is that we have to all become entrepreneurs now, and not just people in technology, but everyone, because it's going to affect every single role, every single aspect of what we do, and will get more intense, not less so, probably because of quantum computing and so on. So many disruptive things coming, even more than they are now. So how are you training or mentoring or supporting a lot of these layoff people who, well, how are they feeling right now? What's happening with them? And what do you tell them? And how are you training them?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, because I think, as I said at the beginning, a lot of people, no matter what reason an organization gives for laying people off, people take it personally. They kind of have no choice but to take it personally at some level, and feel, at some level discarded, under, or, devalued, um, not needed. And that's the kind of first stage is assessing where someone's at on that scale, and trying to help them repair that, like trying to help them reconnect with who they are, what they are actually capable of, what they can do, what they have ability to do, and to sort of just help them see themselves as more positive, capable human beings, as opposed to allowing someone else's choice, which almost certainly wasn't personal in most cases, in the sense of large layoffs, that they weren't saying, well, you're no good, so I'm getting rid of you, kind of thing. It was more of a, we don't need that function or team or product or whatever it is anymore, because it's not making enough money or whatever. So that's the first stage, is kind of helping rebuild that identity, and try to get people to have some confidence. And then it becomes the, what are the opportunities? What is next? And trying to help them understand what they actually really want and care about. Because often people accept, or normalize a role, a job in some way, when a large portion of it is often something they don't enjoy. They don't want to be spending their time doing. So for me, it presents that opportunity to reevaluate that and say, what would you like to have more of in your day, and why? And that can often lead to subtle changes in whether it's what they look for next, or how they approach that, or what filters they use to look for those next roles.
Yes, and that's a big job right there, that kind of work. And how do you find people are responding to you? Are most of these men? Just curious.
Actually, I would say it's a fair mix. There are still, I believe, a lot of challenges for folks that don't identify as male in the tech industry,
Right.
to get jobs. I think there is a definite bias that there's always been a I mean, there's been studies on this, but like a simple example to give is, if a job description says they want 10 things, I can't remember the exact stats, but it's something like if a should we say a white male sees that list and they've got 3 of those things, they'll feel confident about applying for that position. But someone identifying as female would actually want to have all 10 and perhaps more besides before they would feel confident applying for that position. And that's quite a telling study that was done. And I think what that really relates to is that there are a lot of situations where someone may feel they need to be more driven, they need to be more capable, they need to be more in order to do well. And I think that's a challenge that coaching can also help with. But the problem is that there's only one side of that equation that's being addressed and the other side isn't. So the hiring managers, the hiring leaders also need to learn that they have biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious, around those things that they need to think about. This plays a little bit into how we're seeing some of the layoffs affecting the first and second level management roles as well. Is that part of that challenge of, I mentioned the pressure from above and below. So often what that leads to, particularly in software engineering organizations, at least what I'm seeing, is a new role which is being called a TLM, so technical kind of lead manager. And it really means that the manager is actually still doing the software engineering work. So part of their time is being spent being effectively a member of the team. And that means that there's less actual people management going on. They're splitting their focus, splitting their time, and they're trying to fill gaps in the team's capability in delivering on the software engineering side.
Interesting. I've seen the same in other positions, not just technology positions. I've seen the same. And so the managers are feeling like they have to actually do the work. And so they have much less time to study themselves. What's really going on? How does this fit in? What's something missing that we need to add? So a lot of the work of adjusting a team to the new reality isn't getting done, right? They don't even have time to think, what do we need? What should we be doing?
Right.
How differently can we do the work together or whatever? There's just no time for the reflection.
Right. And that's another key piece, I think, is, and again, this is something that I end up coaching a lot of people on, but it's like creating that time to think strategically. Because so many people are, as you say, that they're literally living in reactive state all the time. The typical way people describe it is they feel like they're just keeping their head above water. They do things, they're doing diving catches, they're jumping into fires to try to put them out quickly so that they can keep them and their team from sinking, essentially.
So do you have any case studies or any, without naming names, but of people that you've been working with that you've seen them go through this process? And what are some of the observations that you have for actual cases of being laid off and then how someone transitioned into something else?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've got a few, but like I said, the steps are, I guess, broadly similar for most folks, where they have to almost get through that, the 4 stages of grief type situation when they go through that. Some get through it quickly, they kind of, if they've been through it before, for example, they might recognize that it's not as personal as they may have first, thought it being, and therefore they don't have as much kind of an issue or a dent that they have to repair. And they can transition more quickly. But, again, working through with people, what is it you really want? What would be an ideal position for you? And then, from that, then working out a strategy for, finding that. But also being very open and broad with, where they might find those kind of opportunities, because often again, that short-sightedness comes into, well, I'm used to this, or, a simple example might be, being stuck to a domain, thinking that their value and their worth is tied to a particular domain. Like someone who's been working in the finance industry, for example, might think they need to look for another role in, the finance industry. And so sometimes it's just opening their mind to say, well, your skills, your abilities, your experience is equally transferable to, another industry, whether that's healthcare, whether that's, pure IT, or, software engineering, or, just a different domain itself, away from finance.
That's great. I do wonder, though, the algorithms and so on, and all of the online applications that people have to go through, thousands sometimes of applications before getting one hit, because of how specific the algorithms are working in favor of what that position actually calls for. So you do end up getting a system where they're looking for people that plug straight in. And that's
Very
the
true.
other thing that I find really a negative way of solving our problems right now. The thing we want is really more new ideas, more different views. And the more that we get people who are thinking authentically from a multitude of different new perspectives, the more likely we are to find solutions quickly, right when we need them, because otherwise we wouldn't have known, right?
Yeah.
If we're all the same and we've all got the same similar background, how are we going to even know?
And
So,
that's the flip of that as well, right? Like, so the other people that we need to be working with are again, those hiring managers, because the natural kind of, and again, studies have shown this, the natural kind of bias is to hire someone that's like you, right? And we project ourselves. And so, as you say, we're getting a lot of, kind of shopping list, job descriptions, right? Like they want everything. And the algorithms, the automation that's being put into place is attempting to, to filter on that. And, right now with AI, we have very little in terms of, guidance or guardrails around these things. There's actually an EU AI Act that's coming into play, and it actually just got deferred, which is trying to regulate this space. When you're using AI to make decisions about humans,
right.
Whether it's from a HR perspective, whether it's from a health perspective, there's a lot of, work being done in this space, which could be quite damaging if it's not, it doesn't have the appropriate oversight, should we say. In the same way that humans are very damaging in this space, as we've just talked about, the biases that exist in us as humans. So we do need to, have better hiring, whether it's hiring managers, whether it's recruiters, all of those people need to be, really thinking about that diversity that you've just talked about and the value of that, and not trying to look for basically Lego bricks that are just going to fit in your existing, kind of structure or whatever.
Yes, well said. And that would be part of, if we were to flip some of these observations, as you were talking about flipping, looking at things from another angle, if we were to make some of what we've talked about into action steps, as we love to do in ending a coaching session, is in order to get what we want, which is meaningful work for everyone, let's just say, that certainly I think you and I agree that AI has brought many benefits to us. I enjoy working with it on so many levels, but as we progress, that we as humans need to stay very involved in these decisions, in this decision making. What would be, say, 2 or 3 ideas that you would like to leave our listeners with in terms of what actions they can be taking in their, whether they're working as a team member, a manager, a CEO, a VP, whatever role they're in, what could you leave them with today as something to keep in mind?
Yeah, it's a tough one to narrow it down, but I think something that we focus on quite a lot through coaching is self-awareness. It's being aware of not only what you're thinking, what you're doing, but of the implications and impacts of that. Like taking time to think through when you're making a decision that can have an impact. And I think part of this really comes out of this idea that we are use the phrase being more short-sighted. And I think most organizations, and we've created a culture of this, where we have publicly traded organizations that report every 3 months. We've created this very short-sighted view where we're typically aiming 3 months ahead all the time, and we're not, again, to reflect back on what you said, having that more sort of Japanese cultural kind of view, which is we want to build a sustainable organization, company, business. And in order to do so, what we're actually going to do is to help our people grow with us by moving them into roles where they can keep growing and keep learning and keep bringing everything that they've already developed and learned and experienced to that. We tend to have this much more short-term or short-sighted view that says we only care about the next little while. This layoff kind of culture feels a bit like I can dispose of and then rehire if I need it type of idea, and like turn a tap on, turn it off. You're losing so much by doing that if you don't develop your people, if you don't grow them and help them be the best they can be and connect them with that long-term vision. What are we actually trying to achieve long-term? Not just, what's our quarterly report going to look like, but what are we actually trying to do as a company? What are we trying to change about the world? What value we bring into the world? Then I think you can actually get people to, again, have their own self-awareness, their own understanding of what's my part in that? How do I contribute positively and well to that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I think we'll be talking frequently, Stuart, if you don't mind. I'd like to check in with you
Pleasure.
every, few months, maybe every 6 months, to see how things are changing, because they are changing so quickly and new things happening, especially with a lot of the people that you interact with. It'll be great to hear how they're progressing in a lot of the changes and shifts that are going on with AI. And hopefully, people will remember some of the tips that you've offered today about what they can do to keep things steady and face the challenges, but with a little more sense of the values and the self-awareness that you're proposing as being a solution that's badly needed right now.
So
Thank you so much. Look forward to
thank you.
talking to you again.
Likewise.